And joining me now for a respectful discussion on how to bridge the growing political divide, Democratic Congressman from Washington, Adam Smith. Congressman Smith, thank you so much for joining me on American Agenda today. I know when we have you on, we like to spar a little bit and go back and forth. And again, I think that's an important part of discourse, of having and sharing different points of view. But as I believe we all know and are all realizing, sometimes that goes way too far when it devolves into violence on either side of the aisle. I just want to hear your thoughts, maybe particularly in reaction to what we heard from Senator Sanders.
Sure. I mean, the number one thought is we're spending too much time talking about, oh, what is the rhetoric? Is the rhetoric too hot? Is this too... Violence is never acceptable, period. No matter what anybody says to you, the notion that somehow, well, it's the rhetoric that's to blame for the violent reaction is something we can never accept in a free society, even if people say something that is deeply offensive. I mean, that is not an excuse to commit an act of violence. We sort of moved past the fact. Yeah, we can get into a discussion about what type of rhetoric we should do, and I think we should probably talk about that. How can we bring the temperature down, learn to disagree in a more productive, less hostile manner? But all of that is a separate discussion from what happened here. Violence is never an acceptable response to something somebody said. And I think that is the one point that should be being made instead of trying to go down all these rabbit holes of whose words contributed to what. No, do not advocate for violence, and violence is never acceptable, no matter how offended you are or how offensive what something someone says is. And I think that's number one biggest point we need to make.
Yeah, Congressman, I agree with you that at this point, trying to play the blame game, to me, only further inflames. And I understand that people everywhere are looking in times of pain and in times of loss and tragedy, you know, trying to scapegoat someone or blame someone. Of course, that makes people feel better. But to your point, in terms of moving forward, how would you suggest that we educate maybe some of these younger people to maybe go back to the way it was 20, 30 years ago, where people could sit down and have civilized conversations, respectful conversations, even if they had completely different points of view. It seems now that a lot of people, young and beyond, get very, very angry and simply cannot almost, I'll say, process their emotions when someone doesn't disagree with them. But the thing is, that's what we do as Americans.
Right. I mean, the biggest thing on that, and I've noticed this in the last 10, 15 years, we have moved from being sort of a representative democracy that believes in free speech and free debate to being sort of an advocacy country where we figure out what we want and then we figure our job is to go enforce that on everybody around us, not understanding that we live in a society. We live with other people who disagree with us. If we're really going to have a civil society and a representative democracy, then in any given situation, you got to figure out, okay, what do you and the groups that you support want? That's certainly part of it. But to get along, you have to figure out what do the other people want and what's in the best interest of society. We just moved past that. No, we're always, no, I have to have what I want. I have to have it all the time. We don't listen to each other. Walk into a conversation from the standpoint of, I'm trying to get to the right answer, not from the standpoint of, I'm trying to force everybody to agree with me. So that's one part of the problem. The second part of the problem is we have become overly sensitive to rhetoric. And believe me, I've been interested in politics and having these arguments, gosh, since I was a teenager. And when I really strongly believe something, and then I run into someone who says, oh, well, that's ridiculous, I don't agree with that. Initially, that's kind of jarring. Sure. I haven't seen it before, and it does sort of emotionally cause you a problem. But the solution to that is not to say, I want to create a society where I never feel that. The solution to that is to understand and grow in your thinking on how to process it. And understand that's part of life. There's a whole bunch of different people with a whole bunch of different ideas. You know, number one, respect those ideas. But the second thing I've found, it's amazing how much you learn if you actually consider the possibility that you might be wrong. And that the person saying this to you, maybe they have a point you haven't thought of. And that's fine if they do. Accept it. If they don't, argue your point. We're just always advocate. I'm right, they're wrong. How come no one's listening to me? let's start thinking about the other people around us a little bit more, and I think that will help.
I think that's a great point. And I think also, I mean, also in your business as a congressman, in mine as a journalist, I mean, I think, you know, we also are trying to make things very clear, get to facts, and also share ideas. And I think sometimes maybe in that, it can show that maybe some young people, well, wait, we can actually slow down and have these conversations. What you see us do in snippets, say, on television, that's not necessarily how the real world works. Instead, let's take a breath. And as you said, let's listen and let's try to learn, even if we disagree. Real quick, before we let you go, Congressman, I want to share what you posted on X. You said the attack on Charlie Kirk today is horrifying and revolting. We must never accept political violence as normal in the United States. My thoughts are with Mr. Kirk and his loved ones, very much echoing what you shared with us today. I'm just going to give you the final word on that.
Yeah, no, I think, and that's the biggest thing, is when something like this happens, I think the political discussion for at least a few days should take a backseat to the simple humanity of the situation. You know, a young man, a father, a husband was brutally murdered in just a horrific fashion. And let's just recognize that. There'll be plenty of time for the political debates and figuring out how we go forward as a country. But, you know, the initial reaction to everything out there shouldn't be, wait a second, how does this affect my political viewpoint? Let's just have basic humanity and basic compassion for this horrible, horrible tragedy that just happened.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Congressman Adam Smith from Washington, and thank you for joining me for a very candid, insightful conversation. And I respect your viewpoints, even if they may differ from mine or my networks or my family's or whatever it is. But again, we can be civil and respect each other, and I appreciate you're doing the same with us here today on American Agenda.
Thank you.
All right, President Trump announcing the location of the next city in his crime crackdown. It might